You're listening to The Gulf Stream, the official podcast of the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi.
Welcome to the fourth episode of Season 2 of the Gulf Stream podcast. I'm Jace Tunnell, Director of Community Engagement here at the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi. Today, we are going to be talking about marine debris and beachcombing, something everybody likes to talk about. What are we finding at the beach? Today we have a guest, Ranger Eric, and he's going to be talking to us about some of the stuff that he finds at the beach too. So Eric, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning. It's Eric from Mustang Island State Park. I'm the park interpreter, which means I do the education and outreach. So everything from public visitation programs to field trips with, elementary all the way up to college level. And I also do the social media for the park. So anytime you've seen a video for Facebook or Instagram with Mustang Island space in it, that's me.
Awesome. So how many years have you been there?
Yeah, so I've been there 13 years, but the first 5 years I was in the maintenance department, and I already had my college degree. From here, actually, I'm an alumni, and I had my marine biology degree, and so the first 5 years I was kind of trying to find my way through the agency, and I thought that I was going to work for fisheries. That was my original intention, but I got to know the previous interpreter, and they were really cool people, both of them. And I started kind of shadowing them and learning what they did. And I said, man, they got it. This is a sweet job. And it's very rewarding to kind of show people all the different things that wash up on one of these Gulf beaches, because we have this zone of convergence. So it's been really fun to do that.
Well, I know that I've done I've met you out there quite a few times, and with different programs. And, I know that the teachers all around the region love working with you out there. And so, man, how cool to be able to talk to them about marine debris and beachcombing, because I think that a lot of people, and this is what I find, is like, I usually start out with something natural that's out there. It's like, oh, look at these sea beans. And then I'm like, and look at this creepy doll, or, something like that. It's like, well, let's talk about where they come from. So it's a good chance to talk to people about where trash comes from, where it ends up on our shorelines. And so we'll get into some of that here as well.
Sure. Well, so on that note, one of my favorite things is to kind of inform people, especially when we have volunteer events where people are picking up trash, and they always end up picking up that soft coral, the sea whip, because it looks so much like trash. And so I usually do start a beach walk trying to find that and showing people, that this is a natural item, and it does decompose and becomes fertilizer essentially for the dune plants. So yeah, there's lots of stuff that mixes together, and it's always kind of like a discovery event and playing a sleuth.
I am so glad you brought that up, because I've seen the same thing. And sometimes that soft coral, when it starts dying, it can smell really bad. So I always think when I see them picking up those big things, it's like, do they not smell that smells like that's an animal? But actually, so on the table here, we have a bunch of different items that we normally find on the beach that we can talk about. But one of them is sea whip. And it
has the little snail on it.
It has the snail. So if people do find that sea whip, they can look real close, and if it's freshly washed up, they can find these little snails called sea whip Simnia on there.
Okay.
And so we actually have a beachcombing episode coming up real soon about this, and these are such cool snails.
They really are.
They would never know about it if they weren't.
Now,
looking
did you
real close.
glue this on there?
No, that's how I found it.
Okay.
It hadn't come off, so don't touch
usually,
it.
Usually you have to find it really fresh to find them, because I think they just get rolled around in the surf and they break off. And so whenever I find out one that's swollen to indicate that it's fresh, I always try to show people that, because it's really fascinating. Apparently, they're so camouflaged. They match the color perfectly. And at one point we were exploring with a little digital microscope, and I showed one of my volunteers the snail under a microscope, and their little antennae that had the little eye stalks or whatever poking up, and they look pretty cute, So
well, if you can get them when like you said, when they first come up, they also have a mouth where they're sucking on the polyps that are on the sea whips. They're real cool. And so in the video, I got some close-ups.
Oh,
of
no
that.
way.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be excited to see that.
Well, and people always ask me, it's like, how do you do video of those close-up shots? I have this crazy camera called the iPhone. I mean, the cameras now are
I know,
pretty
they're
wild.
really incredible.
One thing, and I give probably 60 presentations a year, and it includes a couple different things. One, Nerdle Patrol, but a lot of beachcombing and stuff.
Yep.
And one question people always ask me is like, what's the craziest thing you've ever found?
Yeah.
And I have to sit there and think for a while because there's so many different items that wash up. There's a lot of crazy things. So I have the question for you is like, what's the craziest thing that you found?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that in recent memory that have popped up. One was it must have been about 5 years ago. There was a dead cow, right? And here's what I thought was the most fascinating thing about it. One, where did it come from? It's on the Gulf side of the island. It's not on the bay side. And, there is some agriculture in the area. So there was speculation, like maybe it fell off one of those sheer cliffs along Baffin Bay or something and then washed out somehow. Or it could have just wandered out to the surf and, whatever. It was dead. And so it was like 2 days later, no more than 2 days later, I took one of our interns to go kind of look at it. There was only a skeleton left. The vultures or coyotes or whatever had just picked it clean. And so there was like just a little debris pile around the cow of all the hair and stuff, but it was gone. So that I thought was like really bizarre, just how fast it disappeared.
That is crazy. And it actually is probably a whole nother section you got to know about of people finding a tooth. It's like, what kind of fish tooth is this?
Maybe bovine.
Yeah.
So yeah, that one was pretty cool. Now, let's see. It was back early spring, probably. You remember the refugee boat that was on the north side of Fish Pass?
Right. Yeah.
And it's a tragic story if you think about what happened. It could have been that they made it across and then they just ditched the boat. It could have been that they got caught and Coast Guard, just disposed of the boat, but it gets caught in the loop current and then ends up at Mustang. So there's any number of stories. And so when we went to initially go look at the boat, it was a homemade boat, right? And there was like a little metal platform, I guess, where the motor was sitting. So we knew that it was like probably some Honda V6 or something powering this boat. The motor was gone, but there were some clothes in the bottom. So we knew that they were possibly being in there for a little time. And then underneath that, the first initial decking was just packed with styrofoam, just different sized chunks of styrofoam. And so, I was talking with our officer who was relatively new, and he's like, oh, he went to go check it out. And he came back and told me, oh, yeah, I called Captain to tell him, about this thing just to make sure everything was good. And Captain says, oh, we got to make sure you got to check for serial number. You got to make sure that, this doesn't actually belong to somebody before we just get rid of it. And so that whole process added like 2 weeks to disposing of this refugee boat. And in that time, we had, I think, a late season spring cold front. And it just kind of pushed the boat around and all that styrofoam went scattered down the beach.
Oh, no.
And it was like hundreds and hundreds of yards of big chunks of styrofoam. And it was just like...
I have pictures of it because I went out there. I went out there, the whole stages of it being destroyed.
So that's the reason why we didn't just immediately like, hey, let's get rid of this so that it doesn't just disintegrate.
Well, I kind of like that the park left it out there for a while because there were so many people coming down to look at it. There's so many stories about where did it come from, but people were able to take photos of it. And I know I had done a beachcombing episode on it. And, there was a boat that looked exactly like that washed up.
In the seawall area.
It was right just south of Bob Hall Pier. So just by the seawall. And but it had OK spray painted all over it. And so apparently whenever the Coast Guard rescues the people off of it, they'll put OK on there so that they know that the people survived. And, Coast Guard isn't interested in the vessel, just rescuing the people. And that story, apparently what happened was the people had left Cuba and they were trying to get to Mexico, which is, if you look on a map, is very short. But they got caught up in that loop current and it took them all the way off of Louisiana. And so, a 2-day trip turned into 2 to 3 weeks or a month or something. And there was a ship that actually picked them up, all the people off of there, because they were so, they all survived, but they were very thirsty and hungry and all that.
Wow.
As you can imagine. But then the Coast Guard got them from there and then spray painted the boat. And then, so that boat was seen off the coast of Galveston. And then 2 weeks later, it showed up south of Bob Hall Pier. So it kind of gives you an indication of like, okay, if they're seeing some stuff wash up in Galveston, depending on time of year, it could take 2 weeks to get to our beaches here.
So are you okay? Speaking of Coast Guard and giving everybody the okay, are you familiar with? I've heard them called channel markers, but I've also heard them called Anton, which is something about aid to navigation buoys. So we had this thing that washed up, basically a big metal cylinder, probably weighed a ton. We couldn't move it with a big tractor. But my Coast Guard buddy, he was like, oh, that's just a channel marker, basically, essentially. And then eventually, I think the GLO got involved and they brought a backhoe and they towed it off on a trailer. But then there was that other thing that was off of Mustang Island, kind of in the Newport Pass area. We were watching it for a long time, and it looked like one of those rescue vessels. It was like cylindrical or circular.
Oh, yeah.
And we kept watching it with binoculars, thinking like, what? It's not moving, and the wind is blowing, so we know it had to have moved. So we took a couple of kayaks out, and I snorkeled under it, and it had a chain. Each link was the size of bigger than a football. It was huge.
Oh,
so
my
it was dragging this
gosh,
chain, and that's what was taking it so long. And eventually it did wash in. And I think so that the whole thing with the state not being able to immediately move things is one that, it would probably take 10 bottles of acetylene to cut this up into pieces small enough to transport out of there. But the other thing is you can't just like call a contractor and say, hey, you can cut this up for scrap because it's like the pirating law or pirating regulation. Like, so if I found something worth money at work as an employee, I can't benefit from that, right? So
you got to take your uniform off real quick.
It's like the profiteering thing. Like, you could find all kinds of reasons. I could go put a wire cage like they do at some parks for recycling and then just take all that money home, right? And that's why a lot of things people are like, why doesn't this park recycle? So sorry, side note. We'll get back on track here now.
Well, so I know that earlier this year, there was it a swordfish or something like that had washed up?
Yeah, that one was actually really fascinating too. We do see, so I got a picture yesterday of a big 5-foot alligator garb, which is not the first time I've seen that. And it's a brackish water fish. They can handle a moderate amount of salinity. But anyway, so the I think it was a white marlin.
Oh yeah, white marlin. Okay,
blue marlin.
Okay, I knew it was like some kind of big billfish.
Yeah, no, this one was really cool. It was on my day off, so I only got pictures from coworkers as they were scooping it up with the tractor to move it. And the interesting thing about this marlin is that they have these long bills that they use to swat fish and stun them, and then they go back and capture the fish. Well, this particular fish's bill was kind of stubby and rounded off, and so my brilliant self put that in the comments like, hey, why do you guys think this fish washed up? Did it starve to death because it couldn't eat? And all the comments were saying, no, they're the fastest fish in the ocean. They can feed just fine without that bill. And then somebody else noticed that there was like a gash right here. And I thought it happened from when they were trying to find the bottom of the fish when they were scooping it with the forks of the tractor. So kind of like a forklift. So anyway, we don't really know why it died, but I wanted to somehow preserve some of it to use it in my education trunk that I have a dolphin skull and a turtle skull. And so I wanted to add it.
Why not put a marlin up there?
I know. Well, the thing is, the marlin was, I think, like 6 feet, minimum 6 feet, a couple 100 pounds. And its skull was bigger than the dolphin skull that I have in my trunk. So it's, this
huge.
Big. I would need another trunk just for that skull. But when I went to go, we left it for the ants and the flies to take care of all the nasty part. And so when I went back like a month later and picked up the skull, a bone about this size washed out, the size of this cockle shell, and it was round, and it was their eye socket. And so I used that in the trunk, and it's really kind of fascinating because it's 2 pieces. And I tell people this is my speculation or what I kind of researched a little bit was that they change pressure, they change depth so rapidly, going deeper and shallower, that those pressure changes would make their eyes bug out of their head, pop out. You've seen that, like when you're catching a snapper, their eyes will, if they're deep water, their eyes will pop out. And so they have a special bone that goes around their eye and encapsulates their eye. And so that's what I show people from that marlin.
Wow.
But where
so
did
it's the size of your fist.
It's
basically.
the size of a baseball, yeah. It's a huge fish.
That's wild. So where's the skull?
It is. It's still sitting in the shop yard. I have a little bone pile. There's like a spoonbill skull back there, a rosette spoonbill, and I just never found a way to really incorporate it into the trunk because they're so delicate. So some of the things I have back there are just delicate things that, would probably just get rolled around in that trunk and fall apart.
Well, I'm sure people are contacting you all the time about what is this bone? We get messages, text, emails all the time with photos. It's like, what is this?
Okay, so on that note, there's two things. I think I showed you a picture one time a while back because I couldn't figure it out, and I don't even know how to describe the look of this bone. About the size of the palm of my hand, and I think this is what it is. I think it's a tympanic bone from either a whale or a dolphin, because it has an interesting fold to it, and it just gives that. It just looks like something
it's big.
Yeah, it's too big. It's not a drum skull. We see those all the time, but anyway. The other interesting thing, I had a camp host, another volunteer, hand me this thing, and it was kind of like it looked kind of like a sand dollar in a sense. It was round, and so I kept poking around trying to figure out what this thing was, and I don't even remember how I figured it out. But come to find out, it was just a barnacle. But I think barnacles are actually quite fascinating because there's like 4,000 species worldwide, right? And we see these acorn barnacles that grow on the oil rigs. They wash up a lot. But this particular barnacle was one that is specific to a sea turtle. And I'm not sure if it was a leatherback.
It's called a turtle barnacle.
A turtle barnacle.
Yeah, I've got a whole script.
Okay.
I just got to find a turtle that has one on it.
And go steal their barnacles.
Yeah.
They appreciate that, don't they? But it just, I guess because it wasn't associated with the turtle and, it had this weird pattern. If I had seen it on the turtle, I'd be like, yeah, it's a barnacle. But because it was separate, I just had no idea. It took me a while to figure it out. But there's barnacles that are specific to whales, too.
And what about this? Creepy doll. There's barnacles all over this doll.
And so the fact to me, what's interesting is that they're crustaceans. People think that they're, gastropods or bivalves or something, but or limpets. But,
right.
But yeah, no, the dolls, where are the dolls coming from?
Oh my gosh. And so it's funny you say that. You've heard of that guy, John Oliver. Did you ever see that?
Was it John or Jamie Oliver?
John Oliver.
Oliver,
John Oliver. He's that comedian on HBO.
Okay.
He did like a whole 10-minute bit on it because we were posting all these. We actually had videos and everything of all these dolls. And I mean, a lot of dolls.
Yeah.
Even just, the doll we have sitting right here, I found yesterday, and it's like 6 inches high, barnacles all over it. But a lot of. I have kind of my own theory on it, and it has to do with ocean currents.
Sure.
And, there's communities all around the world that they don't have the waste systems that we have here.
Exactly.
Where like they're coming to your house, once a week to pick up your trash. Well, some island nations are just pushing their trash into the ocean, or they live on a river and they're just pushing their trash into the river, which we know everything that is in the river, everything flows to the ocean, gets into ocean currents and washes up on our beaches. And we know from some of the stuff we found that stuff comes from all over the world. Sure. Right here on our beaches. So really they could be coming from anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. So this guy, John Oliver, whenever I was, talking about, this is where the loop current, the Gulf of Mexico, he's cut me off and was like, nobody cares about the loop current. Where's the 4,000-year-old girl that's trying to haunt our nightmares with these? He said, we have to burn all these dolls. Uh-huh. And so what we ended up doing at the end of the 10-minute clip, he was like, we will buy these dolls and for $10,000 so that we can destroy them. And so sure enough, within a couple of weeks, they sent $10,000, which we donated.
And I heard a courier to specifically take the doll back, not just going in the mail, right?
Oh, yeah. So the production company that does for that John Oliver show, they sent somebody down from San Antonio.
Yeah.
Like he had no idea what he was picking up either. And I had 12 dolls and there were so many, they wouldn't fit in a 5-gallon bucket. So they were kind of hanging out of it. So it was like extra
He's
creepy.
Going through the airport with a bucket of dolls.
Well, so here's the deal. He called and said, I'm here to pick up the package. It almost seemed like something illegal. And I was like, okay, I'm heading down. So I go out of my office and I've got these dolls just hanging out of there. And the expression on his face when he saw what I was carrying and that he had to transport, he was like, what is the deal with these? Because he was picking up each individual doll and he was like, he had it like this, like it was very fragile. And then he had bubble wrap and he was bubble wrapping each one, putting it into a box. And he said, this is expensive service. He's like, I'm taking these
I'm dying.
back to San Antonio. I'm getting on an airplane and taking them to New York City, like a personal package. So anyway, they after that happened, they ended up sending $10,000, and we donated it for rehabbing sea turtles and birds.
Nice.
To the Amos Rehabilitation.
It's amazing that benefited, a good cause. But speaking of like, the creepy doll situation, and I know you've talked about the witch bottles, and like recently I found one, and I didn't know what it was at first, but I started poking around, and this is after one of our last hurricanes. We had Alberto and Beryl, and so it wasn't along the beach. It was pushed up behind the dunes, so to speak. And I reached out to you, and I was like, hey, man, this thing looks like it's full of dirt and broken light bulbs and nails. He's like, oh, yeah, that's a witch bottle.
And that one, so the thing about those witch bottles is, like, if you find them with sharp objects, that's and this is like, in all the research we do with witch bottles.
Yeah.
So it's not like we know a lot about them. Uh-huh. But what we've heard is that when they have sharp objects in there, that's to harm someone else.
Okay.
And so did you open it?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't really believe in any of the supernatural stuff. Like, that's just me. But I still don't want to tempt fate. And so I just dug a hole and buried it. And so maybe it's protecting Mustang Island for the future now. That's what I'm hoping.
Or the opposite.
Maybe. I don't know. But I buried it so that in a place that nobody should disturb it for 1,000 years. So hopefully no hurricanes come. I think it's deep enough that a hurricane wouldn't even wash it out. It's behind the dunes.
Yeah.
I didn't even bother to make a GPS coordinates because I was like, I don't ever want to see this thing again. It creeps me out.
Well, I have found about 10 of those over the years.
And I heard you have one in your office.
I've got they're all in my office. Yeah, because my wife was like, get those out of here, never open them. And I've never opened, actually, right. I did open one. It was from Cuba, and I thought it was a message in a bottle.
Oh, yeah.
Because like here's a message, in a bottle that we found. Because I found over 40 of them. So I thought it was like, okay, this is just a message in a bottle. So I start taking all the messages out, and there was only one with writing. It was all in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And then there was about 25 receipts in there. And they were handwritten receipts. And so I had it translated. And apparently this was somebody asking for their sins to be forgiven because they had done all this embezzlement and everything. And so this was their way of, getting rid of all the bad stuff that they had done, was put it all into the bottle and throw it in. So it was from Cuba. So I ended up finding it, I don't know, it was like a year and a half, 2 years later after they threw it in. And so that's the only one I've opened before. So
did you, in your research, did you come across, like, is it witchcraft? Is it Santeria? Or is there a number of others that I'm unfamiliar with?
So you know more about it than I do. The one thing I did find out was, like, in the United States, where the majority of witches live, like the highest concentration is New Orleans.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense because they have a lot of that Creole, during the trades and all that stuff. So It makes sense,
Yeah. Well, so off of witch bottles and other bottles, it's like, over 40 messages in a bottle I found. Have you ever found a message in a bottle?
I've only found, I think, 2. And one of them was like from Ball Ball Pier, some lady that was mad about her boyfriend, they broke up and she threw it off of Ball Ball Pier. And
you found it 12 hours later?
I found it, right. 12, just minutes later. But no, the best one I ever found, and it was another detective story because I had to... I tried to do the ink had faded on the message. And so I tried to do the pencil lightly scratching it to get the...
Like the Big Lebowski?
Yeah, exactly. And that didn't work. So it didn't... I could kind of see some letters, but I couldn't really make out all the words. But I posted a picture of it because it had a letterhead. So somebody's personal letterhead. And I don't remember what it said, but it was letterhead specific to their sailboat. And this was a couple from Norway on their honeymoon in the Caribbean. And they had thrown the message over, and it washed up at Mustang. And somebody said, hey, you should get on with the ship registry because everybody logs where they've been, and it'll have their name. And so I did that research to find out their address, and then somebody actually, on my behalf, found their address or their email or maybe their social media, somehow found them, and they had a picture of when they were, they wrote the message on the note, or they wrote the message down and then they rolled it up and they had a picture of themselves throwing it overboard or whatever. And the message says, we're on our honeymoon from Norway, we're in the Caribbean, and if you find this bottle, contact us and we'll send you some Norwegian treats, which Norway has some amazing chocolate, right? It's really good. And then they have some other stuff that is very unusual. There was one, and I think if I'm not mistaken, the name of this treat was Hockey Pucker. And it was like a little disc of salty, sour mint. It was the most bizarre flavor. I couldn't eat any of them. I tried one, and for like a minute, I was like, okay, this is very weird.
That's when you give it to your coworkers.
Yeah. But no, I ate all the chocolate, or me and my wife ate all the chocolate. It was really good.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a cool story.
Yeah. No, that one was fun.
Okay. I have found quite a few from the Caribbean, and I have found some others where the people were vacationing in Port Aransas, and I'll find them like 3 days later or something like that. But I think some of the most interesting ones is when they come from far away and they have barnacles all over them. Right. And but there actually is an etiquette that I try to tell people, and we always tell people for marine debris, never throw anything in the ocean. But if you're gonna do a message in a bottle, like if you're just gonna do it. There's a couple things you need to know. One is always write in pencil, because if it's
ink
in pen,
fade.
Ink fades.
Or run if it gets a little drop of water in there. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And make sure the bottle's dry if possible. I mean, we find them where they'll have, it was a Merlot or whatever. So like it turns red and then black from mold and stuff. So, and it's harder to get the message out. But I'll always put the date. Because that is so important. It's like, okay, how long did it take to get where, and then where you threw it in.
Right.
Though, and then you're supposed to put money in there. So I found a couple with dollar bills. One had $2 and one had $1. But they were, that's supposed to pay for postage. And so you never put your email. You're not supposed to put your phone number, which people always do that. Yeah. You're supposed to put your address. It's supposed to be old school communication. And then the postage is paid for with the money that's in there.
Now, so obviously you learned some of that just by having some failures, right? Trying to open this message and you can't read it. Is there a place where you found that out as far as like all the little details?
Just from going through, I kind of made up my own etiquette.
Okay. I like that. No, we should definitely like that. We should pin that to the top of our social media. Is like, hey, first of all, glass on the beach, like duh. But if you're gonna do it, like seal your bottle and make sure it's dry.
Yeah, and a green bottle is best, because the clear bottles, it really does fade.
Yeah, I didn't even think
so the
about
bottle
that.
I have here, it's a whiskey bottle. It's clear. It's real heavy. This was actually from an 11-year-old girl that was going around the world with her family on a catamaran. And when they got off the coast of Brazil, right across the equator to celebrate, they threw this message in a bottle in. And so I found it like a year and a half later. This would have been in 2021. It had 2 different pages in there. One, the girl had drawn with crayons and colors a picture of the world, and it had where they had been around the world and where they saw whales, where they threw the bottle in, their track, all that kind of stuff. And then the other was all in French, and I don't speak French, so I had to get it translated and everything. And so what I ended up getting off of there was an address. And so I emailed them I wrote them a letter, and about a month later they wrote me back.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's not the end of the story.
Okay, go ahead.
So that was 2021. So this year, 2024, I was in Tampa at a scientific conference, and I was given a presentation on science communication or whatever. And I had message in a bottle in there. I had a picture of this bottle, and I talked about it. And a scientist came up to me afterwards, and she was like, I think I know that family. And so we did a selfie and all that. And, it was like a 4-day conference. So she comes up to me the next day and says, you're not going to believe this, but since I was 4 years old, I grew up with the mom of the girl that threw this in. And so we exchanged emails.
Is that serendipity? Is that what that?
Yeah, it's got to be. So, now that we're connected through email, the lady was like, we need to get together at some point. And so I went home, I told my wife, and she's like, they are not coming here. We're going to France. Because they live on a small island right off the coast of France.
No
and I was
way.
like, let's go. So, we're hopefully going to be planning that trip.
Okay. So, okay. That is a fascinating story. Geez, just what a coincidence. But And that map, if that was something I found, I think I would be tempted to like have it framed and put it up on my wall. And you put it back in the bottle.
Well, and I don't know if you remember Tony Amos.
Oh man, yes.
So Tony had found over 150 messages in a bottle, and he had this deal. He would take them out. So Tony Amos is the guy who started the Amos Rehabilitation Keep. I don't know, back in the early 80s or something like that. But he did beach surveys every other day for 42 years. So he found a lot of messages in bottle. But what he would do, he would take them out, he would dry them out, he would make a copy of them, and then he would put them in a file. And then he would put the copy back in there. So they were always the same. Well, I'm not really attached to these messages in a bottle anyway. I do dry it out and everything, but then I put them back in, and I've got them in my office and at my house, and just ways of telling stories. But I love the idea of framing it, especially
a drawing with a world where we've been, and then the story.
And then the French side. Yeah. I mean, I'll never be able to read it, but how cool.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, no, I don't want to segue too quick, but speaking of Tony Amos, I met him probably 11, 12 years ago, the first time we had an injured turtle. And he came out, sweetest man, took his time to explain everything about what he was doing and why you don't do certain things, why he's wearing gloves, why. And it was really fascinating. And so I had a great admiration and respect for the guy. And I heard, one thing, one of the largest data sets in the world was his research.
Yeah. So
am I saying it accurately?
Well, so he wasn't just on the beach. We do a lot of video and pictures and try to educate people about stuff. Well, he was out there collecting data.
Right.
And so he would count number of people on the beach, number of dogs, number of cars, plastic, types of debris coming up, the type of plastic that the debris was. Mm-hmm. He would count helicopters, shrimp boats, birds. Yes, absolutely. Birds, sea turtles.
He must have had like 10 different clickers all labeled with like car.
So there was a 7-mile stretch of beach, which is now called the Tony Amos Beach. And that is from Access Road 2 on Mustang Island, just north of the state park, Mustang Island State Park. And so if you go 7 miles up, it's that whole stretch of beach there. And he did that every other day for the 42 years. And so he just finding all kinds of stuff. But that data has been put into the Conrad Blucher Institute database over here. And there's 1 million data points just from that 7-mile stretch of beach. And so that's interesting in that you can see how marine debris changes over time. Has it improved? Have we gone from glass and metal to more plastic? I mean, there's just a ton of information. The birds, if the birds were banded, like we have the snowy plovers, the piping plovers, the red knots, some of those ones that have some crazy migration patterns. He's been able to see, there was one bird that had come back, something like it was 16 years in a row, the same bird. And this is a piping plover. It came back to the same beach within 100 feet.
Incredible
for
sight
16
fidelity. Yeah.
years in a row.
Right. And it's funny because you'll think of like these little birds as like disposable, like, oh, they only live a couple of years like a net, so to speak. Right. Like, right. And then here they are living this incredible life, making this incredible journey year after year, not getting hit by cars, not been, hit by a wind turbine nowadays, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we brought him up because really that's how, that was one of the reasons I had gotten into being able to go out and on a weekly basis. So that's good. Okay. How has social media shaped and impacted your job?
Oh, this is an interesting question. So, I began my career as the interpreter, the education outreach person before COVID days. And I was really comfortable just doing public presentations for 20, 30, or 40 people or whatever it was that happened to be on the beach that day, or, field trips, college groups, etc. But when COVID hit, all that stopped. They said, you can't do any public programs. You can't, if there's something on a touch table or whatever, you got to put all that stuff away because if somebody touches it and then pass. So it was back when the protocols were very new. They didn't know how easily it was transmitted or how hard it was. And so they said, why don't you do some social media videos, right? And up until that point, I'd only posted pictures of scenery and stuff like that. And I had never been on camera for more than 10 seconds or whatever. And it was nerve-wracking. It really was nerve-wracking. So they suggested Facebook Live. And so I did, I tried to do like an hour Facebook Live, basically with like some of the type of things that we have on the table and just showing that to the camera. And, I was sweating profusely. And then as soon as I started talking, I got into my rhythm and I just pretended that I was talking to a person. And then it kind of grew from there. I had a couple of videos. So after that, I became more comfortable sharing stuff that I came across while we were beachcombing. And some of the more interesting things would come up and it would kind of go viral. I think the first thing that really went viral, and it might have been bots. Who knows? It might have been. So here's what happened. We were walking. I had an intern. He was filming me, and he was a great intern because he could do all these goofy edits and make things so hilarious when it was just something mundane. And what I thought was mundane, right? It was a stingray trapped in a tide pool. And so I kind of reached down and I tossed it back in the water, and he's like, "Oh, Ranger Eric, what did you find today?" And it got, I don't know, 10,000 views or something within 24 hours. And come to find out, I think through looking at the analytics, it was a lot of people in India. And I don't, I didn't pay for one of those bot services to like promote your media or whatever. I didn't pay for it. So I was like, how did this get so viral? But then it just kind of kept progressing. That lit a fire. I was like, oh, I like that feeling of being popular or whatever. How ridiculous that
More
is.
More views.
Right? Yeah. But that's a double-edged sword, because if you post a video that you think is great and it flops, oh man, that kind of hurts too, but I've come to like just let that stuff. I just try to
that was one of the questions I had for you, because it is so random of like what people get interested in, because some of these videos that we do, I could spend weeks putting this thing together and getting as much footage as I can. I'm like, man, people are just going to eat this up.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, 100 people liked it. But then, I'll do something it's like no editing whatsoever. I was just like, well, that's good enough. I'm in a hurry. Let's just post this.
And then it goes crazy.
And it's like, boom, everybody loves it. It's like, well, what do people really want?
What's interesting too is also the different platforms. So like YouTube is like long format. People have more time, I guess. And then, Facebook, Instagram, it's a different demographic and a different attention span. And so that's what I've noticed too. Like we almost always cross post, and Instagram will do that for you, but it'll be more popular on one versus the other for some reason. So yeah, who knows? How do you figure those things out?
Well, I really like the fact that, before social media came along, and I remember those days.
Yes, same, bro. My wife and I would used to chat on AOL.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you'd go to give a presentation to 10 people, at some group or something, or go into a small classroom and talk to people. Whereas now, we can do a video. We still do all that stuff. We go into classrooms, we go to community groups, and we love doing that. But being able to make a video that, like you said, long-term on YouTube or maybe short-term, Facebook, Instagram, those types of things, has really been able to broaden how many people we can reach and get them interested in the Gulf of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately we're trying to get people to want to protect and lead to conservation.
Exactly. Stewardship.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my overall goal. We don't come out and say that because I think you would lose followers instantly, right? Like, oh, I don't care about this trash. Like I just go to the beach to play. So, but the younger generation is where we're going to find those stewards. I mean, there are great stewards that are already developed, but we need to start fostering the future generations too.
Right. There's quite a few. Well, the parents contact me and they say, "Oh, my kid wants to be a marine biologist and do what you do. How did you get there?" And I was like, "Well, it wasn't like a straightforward path, I was like, have them call me. I'll talk to them.
Yeah, so it's a long
I talk
email.
To students all the time. Yeah.
No, I kind of had a circuitous route too, where I thought I was going to be a fisheries technician, and actually, right out of high school, I thought I was going to be a paramedic. So I went to community college for that. And I did that for a couple of years, and that was like, ooh, that's hard. And so when I finally did go back to university, I just followed everybody's advice. Just do what you love and don't worry about the money. And I am doing what I love, but I am
worried about the money.
Worried about the money sometimes, man.
No,
I'll tell you what.
Well, I mean, I always think, my dad was a marine biologist for many years, and he always told me, he's like, do what you're passionate about, what you love. Don't worry about the money.
Yeah.
That might come, it might not, but at least you're doing something your whole life of what you want to do.
Yeah.
Well, so keeping on the social media platform stuff, which one do you think has the best reach for like what, the beachcombing videos you're doing?
This is I feel like I'm being interviewed right now, and I got to be real careful how I choose my words. So here's the thing, right? So it seems like
I know where you're going with this.
Where am I going? Where am I going?
TikTok.
No.
Oh, okay.
So, okay.
I don't know where you're
I'll
going.
briefly touch on the TikTok thing, but just because, there was a proclamation from government that state employees are not allowed to use TikTok, right? Well, the caveat is that my TikTok account it's my personal account and it's on my personal phone. So I'm not using a state phone to browse it or to post on it. And my superintendent is the one that kind of went to bat for me, because otherwise we were just going to pull that channel down. And just so you know, I have like roughly 35,000 followers on TikTok, and combined on Facebook and Instagram for the parks accounts, I think there's maybe 45,000 followers. So, but
that's awesome.
It is really cool. And so here's my comment is that the demographics are a lot different. So Facebook, it seems like when I look at my the insights or whatever, it's a lot of ladies that are in their 40s to 60s. And then on TikTok, when I look at TikTok doesn't show you, it doesn't break it down like that. It just shows you who your followers are. But I see a lot of comments, and it's a ton of people from San Antonio that like to go fishing on the weekends, or they like to go take their family to the beach on the weekends. And then on Instagram, it's also a fairly young audience from what I understand. And once I had to start doing this for work, it became a lot less fun. And so personally, I spend a lot less time on social media now, just because, if I'm doing it for work, it's just not fun anymore. But I do scroll here and there just to see a couple of things. One, trends of what other people are successful with.
See what people are saying about you.
Oh yeah, you want to know? This is the funny part. So I did start getting a little, I guess, notoriety at the park, and people would ask for me by name. They're like, "Hey, is Eric working today?" Or "Ranger Eric?" What do they call you? They call me, Eric. Is Ranger Eric working today? And so I'll stop by and talk to scout troops or whatever it is that day. But there are times where I share with my coworkers, because I have thick skin and it doesn't bother me. But they used to call me Ranger Daddy.
Oh yeah.
I've had like propositions like,
now
are
that
you
TikTok
married?
channel would go viral.
Oh, Ranger Daddy. Let's change the name. Ranger Daddy. Oh no, and they would call me Daddy Eric, and this was, I'm married. But this was probably also not people that I would be interested in dating. And I'll just leave it at that. But I've had super funny comments like, I must have some enemies out there. Not everybody loves Ranger Eric. So somebody put a comment one time that Ranger Eric eats corn with his butt.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Like,
the good thing about, and I like social media for this, but they allow you to hide comments. So if anybody's too crazy, it's like, boop.
No, and that's why
block them from
for sure. And that's why, like, women specifically, if they post something, they get stalker vibes, like comments, and like, I would block them. And a lot of times, if you post something that might be controversial, or like if it's not hard data or hard science, you're just speculating, people will tear you up in the comments. But that's also what kind of makes the video go viral, which is, and our overall goal is stewardship and resource protection. So we're hoping that the armchair commanders battle it out amongst themselves, and I don't have to go answer all these comments. So, because sometimes the comments are just like,
well, so, and I've done this. I got the species name wrong. The common name. One time I did this American eel video, which apparently there was about a 5.5 foot eel that I found. And within the first 24 hours, I figured out that's not what it was. It was actually from a fisherman, and it was dead. The colors don't look the same. It's degraded. It's like, it is hard to tell. But the whole video was about the awesome life cycle that this American eel has, going from freshwater and offshore. And it was so cool. I was pretty proud of it. And then about 24 hours later, they're like, "Oh, it's a king snake eel." And I was like, oh my gosh, because it was already on social media. And within 24 hours, it was on CNN. It had gone viral already. It was like too late,
Yeah.
So what I did, I went into the YouTube channel and the Facebook that it was posted on. And right below, I said, everything about this video is about American eel, the awesomeness of it, all that. And I said, but it's actually a king snake eel. But by then, it's too late.
It's too late, yeah.
But, we don't always get it right. And some of this is because we're on beaches that don't always have cell service. So when you're trying to confirm something and the animal's dead and it doesn't have all its parts and everything, it's hard to tell. But that's only happened a couple of times, luckily. But what I have found out is that the majority of people aren't real concerned with the actual
details
species name.
and
It's more about, the story that's behind
right.
it and that it's washing up.
Right.
In reality, I could have just said, look at this crazy eel washing up, and they'd be like,
And that's funny because I think about like, oh, if I ever wanted to promote up and go to another park, whether it's in the desert or the piney woods, I would be so out of my element because I think that's what's so intriguing to me about our coastal bend area is how it's so dynamic. Things are changing, whether it's daily, weekly, seasonally, all these things that are always changing and washing up. It's really fascinating, man.
Well, that's what I tell people is like, the fishermen, there'll be all this sauerkraut bryozoa, which looks like seaweed, but it's actually an animal.
Right.
And they're like, what is it? This is getting all over my line. This is the worst fishing ever.
Yeah.
And I was like, it might not be here tomorrow,
Yeah,
because that's the crazy thing. And it's like, we'll do something on spaghetti monsters, which, it's typically we only see those at certain times a year. They're a little jellyfish, not a true, it's like a siphonophore, but it looks like an eyeball with the guts hanging out of it. I mean, the craziest looking thing. But people are like, I'm coming down next week and I'm going to find one. I was like, no, they're probably not going to be here.
The same thing happens with the blue dragons and the storm snails. Like you'll get news agencies that show up a week after and be like, can we go find one? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Everything is different. And speaking of things changing, I would like to hear your take on. So last summer, I've been calling it the upwelling event. So all June and July, the water was brown, even though the winds were light. And typically when that happens, the water gets clear. Do you know about that?
Well, yeah. It's the total opposite of what we have this year.
Right.
In 2024.
We've had
so
like
2023, we had cooler water. There was no chance of going snorkeling anywhere. I mean, it was just dirty. And we had a lot of weird stuff washing up, stuff that you would find that would usually be deeper in the ocean. And so it was all that upwelling is from, the water turning over.
But usually I would think that that's like wind driven and kind of like on a lake. You have the wind switch directions and it just causes a current. But anyway, sorry.
Something bigger going on.
Something bigger, yeah.
Yeah, what's going on here? Luckily, this year's been kind of normal, although it didn't cool down. Water temperatures
88
now.
degrees.
I know.
I think it was 89 a couple of days ago. That's scary.
Well, I do a lot of surfing out here. And these times of years, the wax.
It'll slide right off your voice.
Yeah, or it's all in my chest hair, So, funny stuff, man. Okay. A lot of this stuff, we're doing fun stuff about stuff washing up and getting engagement. I think this is the ultimate engagement tool because the Gulf of Mexico is endless in content that it brings us. Right. And there's so many neat things to talk about, whether it's marine debris or natural items washing up. But in the larger conversation about marine debris, what's kind of your take-home message that you'd like to tell folks?
Okay. Yeah. So controversial, sort of, right? So the state park system gets a big chunk of funding from fishing sales tax, right? So or sporting goods sales tax, and it goes to fund state parks. So whether you buy a fishing lure or a rod and reel or a gun, some of that tax money goes to fund state parks. So I can't really poop on fishing. I need to promote fishing. And I see, birds entangled. I see turtles entangled. I've snorkeled around the jetties and I've seen fish underwater entangled, so like strapped to a rock, essentially.
It had died from that.
Yeah, it had died. I've seen a cast net that somebody threw from the jetties, which is, a terrible idea. It's always going to snag. And it had live fish in it. And I was luckily able to release them. But So fishing is pretty damaging. And of course, like you were talking about earlier, how, these countries that have no infrastructure to pick up trash and take it to a landfill or whatever it is. On that same note, we had an intern that used to do windsurfing lessons in Mexico, and she saw an actual truck come back and dump trash into basically mangroves. And she asked her boss, like, what's the deal? And he just discarded it and said, don't worry, the next hurricane that we get will wash it right out. And so she told me that story. And I was
where?
Like, to where? To Texas, specifically in Corpus Christi, Padre Island.
Yeah.
No, but and you with trash, anything that floats in the water for a while is probably going to get some curious creatures chomping on it. So we always see turtle bites on plastic bottles and insoles from shoes.
Yeah, we have a bottle here. These are typical from
the vinegar bottles. Is that what that is?
This one's Clorox, but yeah, the yellow ones are vinegar. The clear ones are shampoo or juice.
Yeah,
and they're from Dominican Republic, Haiti area. But they're specific to there. They're a little bottle that has a pinch tab at the top. But almost every single one of these that washes up has a triangle in it.
Right.
And those are the turtle bites.
And I keep that in my trunk to just tell people. And here's my thing is, like, when I'm educating, a family, whether it's kids or adults, shame has never been an effective tool to change people's behavior. If you haven't noticed that, it just causes them to hide their behavior better. So basically just having an open conversation and explaining that, a lot, 70 or 80% of the trash that comes to the Texas coast is not from Texans. Our visitors are usually doing a pretty good job of policing their own trash. But it's hard for them to do that when they see all the debris that has washed up and they say, oh, I dropped a bottle cap. I'm not going to mess with that because there's already so much other trash. So, it's an easy, you can get a lot of fulfillment from just cleaning up your one little spot. Take one of those onion sacks that we provide, just clean up your own little spot, and at least provide safety for your own family. Make sure that you've kind of scoped it out. There's no needles or whatever. Not that that's a common thing, but just take care of one little spot at a time.
Right. Well, and a lot of people don't know there was actually some scientific research looking at how much marine debris accumulates on our beaches here.
Yeah.
And so there's a federal agency, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they have like this methodology that you can go through so that everybody does the same kind of research project on the beach to look at how much is washing up. And so there was one study done here a number of years ago, while at the same time they were doing it in other states in the Gulf of Mexico. And it turns out right here in the coastal bend, we have 10 times the amount of trash washing up on our beaches here compared to any other state in the Gulf of Mexico. And it has to do with the loop current. And so that loop current comes up in between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba, goes up into the Gulf, and then down and gets into the Gulf Stream and goes up the east coast of the Florida. But when it does that, it creates these eddies that swirl off of it, and all that just pushes right up to our coastline. Yeah. And so it's not necessarily, people coming here and saying, oh, people are leaving their trash here. That's not necessarily the case unless you're here at spring break.
Yeah.
When there's like 100,000 people on the beach. It's like, okay, they probably left some of it there, but a lot of it is just washing in from other areas, which is gross, but it also gives us an opportunity to find some really cool stuff washing up.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And with the animals and critters living on it. And so most people are like, oh, we're not going to park here. There's all this debris around. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm like, oh, there's trash. Yeah, pull over.
Yeah. I think it was like a couple of months before Hurricane Harvey, we had found a sign in Spanish, and forgive my Spanish, it was Ruta Evacuación. It was like evacuation route, and it was pointing. Yeah. When I took the picture, it was pointing south in the direction of which Harvey was traveling from. So, and I posted that, and I was like, "Beware, time to evacuate."
Oh my gosh,
that one, and then also we found a Louisiana Fish and Wildlife sign still attached to a 4x4 post, so we know exactly where that came from, right?
Awesome. Well, so let's see. Do you get any requests from fans to come out and assist you in beachcombing?
Oh no,
or groups because they know you're beachcombing. So, is it say a Boy Scout group? Say, oh, can you come out and
sometimes they do plan things. The most request I get on social media comments is like, hey, what's the beach like next week? They want to know the forecast from the local guy, like if it's going to be safe for them to bring a family. But typically, like requests for for beachcombing, I've actually had a few extracurricular groups out here, like the green team. They've requested to come and specifically do beach cleanups. So it is, we do see that our social media content is not just like, oh, for what shells are washing in, but hey, how can we help out? So we do know that the stewardship is evolving and blossoming. So
yeah, that's great. I get every once in a while somebody will be like, I'll volunteer to come with you. And, a lot of the stuff I do is like on an electric bike.
Yeah.
And so every week I ride, it's about 42 miles. And
super fun.
Yeah. My wife always says, you're not really riding. It's electric. I was like, whatever. I was like, you got to pedal. It's like, I pedal about 30 miles of it,
Wow.
And then the rest of it's like, I'm just exhausted by then, especially in the summer when it's 100 degrees, there is the opportunity to ride it like a motorcycle. You can get 20.
So you ride with the motor into the wind, and then the wind pushes you back. So you're pedaling.
There have been times where I'm going against the wind. And I think, it's going to be easy ride back. Yeah, and then the wind switches around. I'm like, oh my God.
The Windy City.
Now, it does depend on where I go, depending on tide and weather, especially if it's raining. I'll go down the National Seashore.
I was going to ask you, is it prohibited there? E-bikes?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But no, I go on a vehicle.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then a lot of the stuff I do Mustang Island and North Padre Island.
Yep.
And then like a couple weeks ago, I went down to Boca Chica because that was one of the ones the Heart Research had a project going on there right next to SpaceX down there, looking at the tidal flats. Super cool. But I was able to do a beachcombing down there. And the crazy thing down there, you know what a blue land crab is?
Yeah.
Well, we had all this heavy rain, and I went down to the beach, and there was over 100 blue land crabs just in the small spot I was in, and they're all just they have like personalities, so that their claws are like way up, and so that beachcombing's coming out.
Okay. But, no spoilers, huh?
Yeah. But no, I've had people say, yeah, I want to go out there with you. I was like, it's a lot. So I do take people every once in a while. I'll take them down. I'll do a vehicle if somebody's coming with me.
Now, see, I would be interested in that if somebody was like, oh, I'm an expert at editing videos or like, doing the cut scenes and like all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That takes so much time. So usually I try to do all my videos on one take.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. I'm the same way. It's like, I might mess up. I might or cut it out.
Yeah. Right.
That's the beauty of editing.
Right. So I'll just say that it has been great knowing you, and I really appreciate the times that you've helped me identify things. And I just look forward to collaborating in the future. I think we can do some fun things.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to continue beachcombing. I think that this is since the Gulf of Mexico has endless amount of stuff always washing up, and on a weekly basis, I'm always amazed at that.
Right.
Let's continue doing it and educating the public. Well, if anybody is interested in following our social media pages,
sure.
Tell them how to follow you.
Yeah. So if you're on Facebook, it's Mustang Island State Park. Make sure it has the state park on the end. And then our avatar is what the old sign used to look like up at the highway, which was the big concrete check mark. But anyway, sorry. So Mustang Island State Park, and then it's the same on Instagram.
Okay. And if anybody's interested in following us on beachcombing on the Heart Research Institute, it's easy. Heart Research. That can be YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, spelled HARTE Research. Okay. So our next episode will be coming out next month for the podcast. And I hope you follow along and catch us at the beachcombing. We'll see y'all later. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, consider contributing to a greater Gulf by visiting heartresearch.org. That's HARTE research.org.